Are you wondering why you can't lose weight? I'm gonna go over a few questions that you can ask yourself. The first thing you want to ask yourself is, are you actually in a calorie deficit? So it doesn't matter what type of diet you're following, whether it's high carb, low carb, whatever carb, high fat, low fat, whatever. If you're not in a calorie deficit, you'll not lose weight. So that's the first question that you need to ask yourself. And there are a few things that you need to unpack there as well. So the next question is going to piggyback off of what I just said. So are you tracking everything that you're eating, drinking, whatever it is throughout the day? Are you tracking that? Because if you are not sure if you're actually in a calorie deficit, how will you know if you're not actively tracking what you're putting in your mouth on a daily basis? And there's different ways to track. You can use a tracking app. MyFitnessPal is common. You can use a food diary. Any way that you can just track how much you're consuming is gonna be super beneficial, because that will give you an objective metric of what you're actually putting in your body, so you can see if you're in a calorie deficit or not. To piggyback off of that, are you tracking consistently and accurately, right? So we need to make sure that when we're tracking, if it's not consistent, if we're not, tracking day after day, if we're not paying attention to how much we're consuming, not just during the week, but also on the weekend, that can throw off a lot as well. And that can take you out of that calorie deficit, which is the first main thing that we talked about. So make sure you're tracking consistently and then also accurately. So when you're tracking things, are you measuring them? Are you using, tablespoons, measuring cups? Are you using a food scale? There's a lot of different ways to track, but one of the most common mistakes that I see is that we're not tracking accurately, and we may tend to consume a little bit more than we think we are, or even a lot more. So tracking accurately is gonna be super important to make sure that you're on track. The next question to ask yourself is, are you eating enough protein? So protein is super, super important, especially when it comes to losing weight. There's so many different reasons. A few of the main ones are protein keeps us, satisfied throughout the day. It keeps our hunger in check, keeps cravings low. It's also super important to maintain our muscle mass. So when we're talking about losing weight, we don't wanna just lose weight necessarily. We wanna lose body fat, and we wanna keep as much muscle as we can, right? So tracking and making sure that you're consuming enough protein throughout the day is gonna be super important. And if you don't know how much protein to consume, if you're confused on what that amount should be, typically a range between 0.8 to 1.2 grams per pound of body weight is a good range to be in for everybody. And that's a pretty big range, 0.8 to 1.2. So there's a few other ways to figure this out, but if you are on the leaner side, you don't have a ton of body fat to lose, sticking around that 1 to 1.2 grams per pound of body weight is a good place to be per day. So consuming around 1 gram per pound of body weight per day in protein. So if you weigh 150 pounds, 150 grams of protein per day is a good place to be. And then if you have a lot of body weight to lose or body fat to lose, bringing it back to that 0.8 grams per pound is a good place to start off. Or you can take your height in centimeters and use that to count how much protein you should kind of start off. So if you're 160 centimeters, 160 grams per day is a good place to start. With protein, you're gonna wanna, titrate it up and down depending on how you feel with it. But in general, if the main goal is to lose body fat, keeping protein on the higher side, I've found to be very, very beneficial for many of the reasons I just mentioned, keeping you full throughout the day, making sure you're maintaining your muscle mass, making sure that you are satiated, and it also helps to stave off cravings. So there's so many benefits to protein, and you definitely wanna make sure that you're getting enough. The next question to ask yourself is, are you moving? So are you tracking your movement somehow? With a lot of my clients, we track steps. So we have a daily step goal throughout the day, typically between 8 to 10K steps a day. If you're getting that, that's a really good place to be in. Not saying that you have to be in that range, but making sure that you are tracking your steps so you see how much you're moving. And if you have been losing weight and then you kind of stopped losing for a period of time, it could be that you've kind of down-regulated your movement. And this is very normal when it comes to weight loss. The first thing that tends to go, so to speak, is our movement throughout the day. So if we have less calories coming in, if we have less energy coming in, we tend to move a little bit less like without even knowing it. So you tend to fidget less, you tend to, walk places less and want to take the car. So you need to pay attention to your movement. And we call this NEAT. It stands for non-exercise activity thermogenesis. And all that means is any movement that you're doing outside of formal exercise is going to be considered NEAT. So like I said, moving, walking the dog, doing the laundry, walking outside, getting your steps in, like those are all forms of NEAT. So if you are at a fat loss stall and you're not paying attention to your steps or your movement, definitely make sure that that is something that you're starting to track. The next question to ask yourself is, are you resistance training or lifting weights? So a lot of people think that, doing cardio is going to lead to more fat loss or weight loss. And yes, doing like cardio exercise can definitely lead to fat loss and help with fat loss, but our bodies are very smart. We tend to adapt to cardio very easily. So for example, just to give you an example of this, if you went out and ran a mile today, and then you did that every single day for the next week, you would actually start to burn, or the next few weeks, you would actually start to burn less calories running that same mile because your body becomes very efficient. So if you're doing cardio for the goal of fat loss, you actually don't want to become efficient at it, right? Because you're looking to burn more calories. So cardio is not the best route to go in terms of just focusing on that for fat loss. It can be a great tool, but you should really be focusing on resistance training and making sure that you're lifting weights, because when you're losing body fat, like what's underneath that body fat, right? You want to see muscle, you want to have muscle. So if you're not resistance training, you're not going to be maintaining that muscle mass as you're losing that body fat. So resistance training is really like a signal to your body that says, hey, like don't take this muscle, take the body fat. If you are, resistance training consistently, a few days a week, that's going to send that signal to your body that says, okay, I'm in a calorie deficit. I want to make sure that I'm losing the body fat and not the muscle. So that signal that comes from you lifting weights and putting stress on your muscles is going to tell it to, stick around and take the body fat. So the last question to ask yourself, and last but not least, is going to be, are you sleeping enough? Right? So sleep is super, super underrated when it comes to fat loss. If we're not sleeping enough, there's like endless studies that show our hunger hormones are going to be all out of whack. If we're getting crap sleep at night, it's just going to make it so much harder to stick within our calorie goals. So if we're in a calorie deficit, we're obviously eating less. And so if we're not sleeping enough, it's not that sleep directly, correlates with losing body fat, but if you're not sleeping, your hunger hormones are going to be out of whack. You're going to have, we have two main hunger hormones, ghrelin and leptin. And if you're not sleeping, we see in studies that ghrelin tends to increase and leptin tends to decrease. And that is going to make it much harder to stick within your calorie goals. We also know that if you're, not sleeping enough, it tends to make you a little bit more anxious, tends to increase cravings, hunger, like I mentioned, and it just makes everything harder. So if you can get your sleep dialed in, like 7 to 9 hours is a good range to be in for optimized sleep, that's going to go a long way. And I know it doesn't sound sexy or anything, but sleep is one of the most underrated pieces of fat loss that I've seen in my coaching practice. So definitely make sure you're paying attention to sleep. So those are just a few of the questions to start asking yourself. And I know they might seem super basic, but I promise you, if you can get all of those dialed in, you will see results. Thanks so much for watching. If you want to learn more about nutrition, fitness, or metabolic flexibility, you can check out our website, metflexlife.com. There you can find our podcast, MetFlex and Chill, our nutrition and exercise programs, our latest blog posts, free recipes, and much more.